Hi, it's Mo Love True. It's the 26th of May 2019 and it's 1:50 in the afternoon. The grandmother had mentioned a little finding she had about Curious George and how it's based on George Bush Sr. So I thought I'd read this article, read the book. Essentially, George Bush Sr. Was in contact and interacting with Nikola Tesla. And so that's where this Curious George comes out. As I was reading it, I think you might also enjoy this revealing of the private side hidden in plain sight for a population or demographics that would have grown up with this. This is George. He lived in Africa. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. One day George saw a man. He had on a large yellow straw hat. The man saw George too. What a nice little monkey, he thought. I would like to take him home with me. He put his hat on the ground, and of course, George was curious. He came down from the tree to look at the large yellow hat. The hat had been on the man's head. George thought it would be nice to have it on his own head. He picked it up and put it on. The hat covered George's head. What's curious about the man wearing yellow and having a yellow hat to entice George with is that yellow is in the Swiss trains. That's the first class section. And then you've got blue, which is the cargo, or the commercial packages. The precious cargo is always in blue, and that's Admiralty law. And the reverse, or the complementary color to yellow, is purple. So yellow is the sovereign color. He couldn't see. The man picked him up quickly and popped him into a bag. George was caught. The man with the big yellow hat put George into a little boat, and a sailor rowed them both across the water to a big ship. George was sad, but he was still a little curious. On the big ship, things began to happen. The man took off the bag. George sat on a little stool, and the man said, "George, I'm going to take you to a big zoo in the big city. You will like it there. Now run along and play, but don't get into trouble." George promised to be good, but it is easy for little monkeys to forget. So here there are a few things that the man with the yellow hat brought George out to sea onto a big ship. They're heading out to Admiralty law. And Admiralty law is basically the high seas, where everything out in Admiralty law is the crown, and anything under merchant law is when they leave the harbor, and that's where the commercial zone is 200 miles off from shore, and that's where they call it the economic free trade zone in economics. This is the same zone where piracy happens as well. On the deck, he found some seagulls. He wondered how they could fly. He was very curious. Finally, he had to try. It looked easy, but oh, what happened? First this, and then this. Where is George? Perhaps there are some viewers who can remember in their dreams when they used to fly, and maybe in more recent times the flying stopped. or maybe in the early days of our life, we stopped flying in our dreams because of all the trauma. Well, being able to fly out over the sea, it's that concept of being sovereign. And this whole concept of falling into the water and what happened to George, it's when we're on the high seas. And it seems like only the sovereigns or the monarchy can save us. The sailors looked and looked. At last they saw him struggling in the water and almost all tired out. "Man overboard!" the sailors cried as they threw him a lifebelt. George caught it and held on. At last he was safe on board. After that, George was more careful to be a good monkey until at last the long trip was over. George said goodbye to the kind sailors, and he and the man with the yellow hat walked off the ship onto the shore and on into the city to the man's house. That the man with the yellow hat lives in the city, and it's in the city where the zoo is located. It's significant to realize that the city is the zoo. After a good meal and a good pipe, George felt very tired. He crawled into bed and fell asleep at once. Anybody hooked on food, bad food, or nicotine, those are the industries to be aware of. They're just part of a few players in this distraction that keeps everybody asleep, and especially in the city. The next morning, the man telephoned the zoo. George watched him. He was fascinated. Then the man went away. George was curious. He wanted to telephone too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The telephone industry, or the telecommunications, it's a grid that was set up very early on, and it's part of the problem. So we have all these clues that are adding up in this children's book. Ding-a-ling-a-ling! George had telephoned the fire station. The firemen rushed to the telephone. "Hello, hello," they said, but there was no answer. Then they looked for the signal on the big map that showed where the telephone call had come from. They didn't know it was George. They thought it was a real fire. A Smell Love True side note. As I'm making this Curious George video, I am being struck by dew. They are finding the body of water, and protect your head. Top of your head seems to be pretty vulnerable regardless of copper intake. Mirrors are good for deflection, also ground. So I'm wearing my copper vest and I'm grounded, and all around me I am hearing darts. So with this, the fire department is connected to the telephone company, and one of the best paying jobs that anybody could get, especially those who are physically fit and men, is to get a firefighting position. Very good benefits, well paid at a county level, which is actually where the seat of the government is. It's on a county level, not at a state or a federal level. So, if you know a firefighter, ask them about their benefits package and what kind of technology they have. Hurry, hurry, hurry! The firemen jumped on the fire engines and on to the hook and ladders. Ding dong, everyone out of the way! Hurry, hurry, hurry! The firemen rushed into the house. They opened the door. No fire. Most activities happen on the roadways, and so with the fire departments having to use the roadways, they're also under state and federal jurisdiction, depending on how well maintained they are. I find that federal roads are kept in better condition than state roads. Only a naughty little monkey. Oh, catch him, they cried. George tried to run away. He almost did, but he got caught in a telephone wire. And the thin fireman caught one arm, and a fat fireman caught the other. You fooled the fire department, they said. We will have to shut you up where you can't do any more harm. They took him away and shut him in a prison. George wanted to get out. He climbed up to the window to try the bars. Just then a watchman came in. He got on the wooden bed to catch George, but he was too big and heavy. The bed tipped up. The watchman fell over, and quick as lightning, George ran out through the open door. Prisons are warehouses. He hurried through the building and out onto the roof, and then he was lucky to be a monkey. Out he walked on the telephone wires. Quickly and quietly over the guard's head, George walked away. He was free. Down in the street outside the prison wall, he saw a balloon man. A little girl bought a balloon for her brother. George watched. He was curious again. He felt he must have a bright red balloon. Red is the color of the law of the land. He reached over and tried to help himself, but instead of one balloon, the whole bunch broke loose. In an instant, the wind whisked them all away, and with them went George, holding tight with both hands. Up, up he sailed, higher and higher. The houses looked like toy houses, and the people looked like dolls. George was frightened. He held on very tight. At first the wind blew in great gusts, then it quieted. Finally it stopped blowing altogether. George was very tired. Down, down he went, bump, onto the top of a traffic light. Everyone was surprised. The traffic got all mixed up. George didn't know what to do, and then he heard someone call, "George!" He looked down and saw his friend, the man with the big yellow hat. George was very happy. Notice that George doesn't land on the land, even though he has the red balloons. The man was happy too. George slid down the post, and the man with the big yellow hat put him under his arm. Then he paid the balloon man for all the balloons, and then George and the man climbed into the car, and at last away they went to the zoo. What a nice place for George to live. In this last image we see that the man with the yellow hat pays the balloon man for this commercial obligation. And again, George never touches his feet on the ground because the man in the yellow hat is carrying him off to the zoo, or a return back to the Matrix. I hope this book has been an interesting read. My taking a look at it is only because the grandmother had mentioned it, and I know the story in general, but to revisit it, take a look at the details with this new perspective, it's been very helpful. I'm working on a project here. Just took let's see, I think this is a 1 gallon. It had white vinegar in it, but I've made some copper acetate out of it, and I've basically filled it up with water. I'm coming up with a solution or a remedy to regarding dew. So filled it up with water, and I'm going to use a copper wire here. I don't know if we can see that very well. It's not a very thick gauge, and but I've got a lot of it, so I'm just going to wrap this up a bit. Okay, so basically this is to essentially what dew does is it searches for the body of water. The body of water is typically man, who is the targeted individual, the TI. Having a substitute, this would actually be more effective if we also put in hydrogen peroxide into this formula, into this bottle of water. So hydrogen peroxide is used as a tool. Let's see, I've got to look into that, and I'll put it, or insert a picture here, or I'll edit this part here at the 10-minute mark. But essentially, the combination of hydrogen peroxide, which Tony Pantelleresco had mentioned, to avoid using hydrogen peroxide, ingesting it, it's okay to put it in a humidifier. By putting hydrogen peroxide in this bottle of water, dew is going to find this more effectively, and it will be the substitute because it's also got the copper wiring. And with the copper wiring in a concentrated form like this, it would be good to have actually a roll of pennies, copper pennies, to attach to this, and then you've got more substantial attraction happening with the copper, redirecting dew away from the body of water. So the body of water is not damaged, and we're talking about the TI. So this is to go in the trunk of the car, and this will be the target because typically people who have low copper intake need this as a remedy. If you have high copper intake, what I have found is I'm not being affected as severely as the grandmother. So this is going to go into the vehicle, and I would also create this around the property. And the extra wiring here is going to ground it. I would ground this, and basically that would go in the ground, or it would be stuck into the third center hole of the electrical socket, the ground. So I hope that's helpful for TIs. Yeah, I look forward to putting this video together. Let me know any comments for those who have been putting these devices together. I'd like to hear some feedback. The more that I receive feedback, the more I can do some troubleshooting and figure out how it can be better applied or improved. Smell Love True, out for now. To ground the copper concentration, it is to expose the copper by cutting into the wire casing What I've done here is I have doubled up on the copper wiring, and with that slice, I've also placed electrical tape around it. This here happens to be the neighbors who have a code going on to those who are sending the directed energy weapons. The neighbor also has energy directed weaponry that she is targeting me, and I can tell by the direction of where it's coming from. And so we see here the lighter colored clothing means that the targeted individual is away. That's the grandmother. And there's one panty hanging. And that one panty is supposed to be smell of true. Anyway, out for now.